All right, so this was actually my argument, digital physics argument, but there's a friends of mine video on it named Inspiring Philosophy, and my version has integrated information theory, his doesn't, but I like his video on it better because it's kind of more high quality, so here we go.
This is the very question many philosophers and scientists have been asking lately. Although the question would have been ridiculed decades ago, a different picture is now emerging. The results of experimental and theoretical data have been producing some strange results. Results that do not tell us our world is objectively real, but emerging from something else altogether. And in the rise of the digital age, we are starting to see a correlation between our world and the world of a virtual reality. The very notion that our world is virtual, or dreamlike, is explored by Brian Whitworth. He took the two possibilities, one being the realist hypothesis that our world is physical, exists in and of itself, and needs nothing outside of it to explain it, and the other being the virtual reality hypothesis, that our world exists as a virtual reality, depending on information processing happening outside of space-time. He looked at all the facts we know from experimental data and asked which hypothesis better fits the data. After looking through it all, the conclusion was obvious. The data better fits the idea we are a virtual reality. Our world makes more sense if we look at it as a virtual world, and not an objective one existing independently. He started at the beginning, the Big Bang. This established fact that space-time was created from a single event billions of years ago. Although hypotheticals have been proposed to get around this beginning point, the fact remains. Our universe, space-time, began to exist. From the view that our universe is all there is, as an objective independent reality, this makes no sense. How does space-time emerge from nothing? But if we look at the universe as a virtual reality, the Big Bang fits perfectly. Virtual worlds must begin with information influx from nothing. Brian Whitworth says, virtual reality theory fits well with the Big Bang. No virtual reality can have existed forever, since it needs a processor to start up. Every time one starts a computer game or boots up a computer, such a Big Bang occurs. From the perspective of the virtual world itself, the creation is always from nothing. As before the virtual world startup, there was indeed no time or space as defined by that world. Another thing to look at is quantum minima. The fact that things like light are quantized as photons better fits the hypothesis that we are a virtual reality. In digital processing, all events and objects must have a minimal quantity that cannot be reduced anymore, and yet our world has the same effect.
Every computer-generated image, no matter how realistic, breaks down into pixels when you get close enough. You might think this doesn't happen in the real world, but you'd be wrong. In the past century, physicists have discovered that matter really is made of tiny little pixels, fundamental, indivisible particles billions of times smaller than an atom.
Look at the way the universe behaves. It's quantized. It's made of pixels. It's made of individual atoms. Space is quantized. Time is quantized. Energy is quantized. Everything is made of individual pixels, which means the universe has a finite number of components, which means it has a finite number of states, which means it's computable.
And that the true nature of the universe is indeed digital, that we have smallest space, smallest time, and that there's nothing that you cannot compute. And at the moment, there is no evidence against that.
What about the fact that there is a maximum speed, the speed of light? Events in a virtual world must have a maximum rate limited by a finite processor, and our world has a maximum speed. Einstein deduced that nothing travels faster than light from the way the world works, but this does not explain why the world had to be that way. Why cannot an object's speed simply keep increasing? If light is like a classical wave, its speed should depend upon the elasticity and inertia of the medium it travels through. If light travels through the medium of empty space, its speed should depend upon the elasticity and inertia of space. However, how can empty space have properties? Virtual reality theory explains this, but objective reality cannot. There is also how space curving of massive objects and time dilating at high speeds correlates to virtual processing load effects. High matter concentrations in our universe may constitute a high processing demand, so massive objects would slow down the information processing of space-time. In the same way, high amounts of data processing in a computer slow the processing speed down. The fact that all quantum objects are identical to each other correlates to digital equivalence, in that in a virtual world, every digital object created by the same code is identical. The same holds true for quantum particles. And these are just a few of the 11 facts Brian Whitworth lists. He concludes by saying, individually, none of the above short points is convincing, but taken together they constitute what a court might call circumstantial evidence, favoring virtual reality against objective reality. When coincidences mount up, they present a plausibility argument, if not a proof. More powerful evidence is provided by cases which a virtual reality theory explains easily, but which objective reality approaches have great difficulty with. And this is only the beginning. In the hunt for a theory of quantum gravity, the theoretical data better fits the idea we are a virtual reality. Both underlying string theory and loop quantum gravity is the holographic principle. The idea that three-dimensional universe emerges from information processing on a 2D surface.
Maybe the three-dimensional objects, us, everything in the world around us, maybe all of the information in these objects is carried, is smeared around a distant two-dimensional surface that surrounds us, and we're just in some sense a holographic projection of that distant data.
The holographic principle tells us something quite astonishing. It says that our ideas of volume, of the real world in a sense, might be a kind of illusion.
We forget about what space is and what time, and then somehow the information, by thinking about how much information is, what information is doing, then the space-time will, what we call, be emergent. It will come out of just a bunch of zeros and ones.
It should be clear that this whole holographic story is the most radical thing that has happened to our understanding of space, time, matter, since the invention of quantum mechanics and relativity.
Now, someone could always dismiss the theoretical data, but that would be impractical, because it would take away our best chance for a theory rectifying relativity in quantum mechanics. Even so, the experimental data cannot be ignored, and the results of quantum mechanics infers the same implications we see in the holographic principle.
Quantum mechanics means it's possible everything we see could really be produced by lines of code inside a powerful computer.
So we cannot ignore the recent experimental data, like the fact that for objective reality to be true and the world to exist independent of observation, something known as locality would have to follow, which means for objects to interact, they need to be in close proximity. But experiments in the early 80s showed this is not the case. Instant interaction can be seen between two particles that are separated from great distances. This is what we now know as entanglement, and it makes more sense if the world is virtual. In a virtual world, space doesn't limit correlations. All points in a virtual world are equal distance with respect to the source of their simulation. So for example, in computers, all points on a screen are equal distance with respect to the CPU. Processors can ignore screen distance, and the same thing happens in our world. If our universe is a three-dimensional screen, its processing is equal distance to all points in the universe. So the non-local collapse of a quantum wave function could be such an effect. Space seems to be an illusion created by the virtual construct, which is something Einstein came to realize at the end of his lifetime. Hence it is clear that the space of physics is not, in the last analysis, anything given in nature or independent of human thought. It is a function of our conceptual scheme. Space as conceived by Newton proved to be an illusion. But even more strange than this is what quantum physics tells us about matter. Prior to observation, matter doesn't exist. This was demonstrated in the 1920s by the double slit experiment. The existence of matter is dependent on observation, and recent experiments have not only reconfirmed this, but have debunked theories in order to avoid the conclusion that the existence of matter is observation dependent. Now many accept that particles do not exist prior to observation, but they exist in a state of a wave, which then forms into particles upon measurement. But this would be false. As they point out in the quantum enigma, quantum probability is not the probability of where an atom is, it is the objective probability of where you or anybody will find it. The atom wasn't someplace until it was observed to be there, which is what Heisenberg said years ago. The atom or elementary particles themselves are not real. They form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than one of the things or facts. But what does this all mean?
These basic rules of quantum mechanics apply to all tiny subatomic particles. When we look at them, they are just dots. When we look away, they lose their physical form.
A different way of looking at that is to say, well, how parallel is this behavior with what I see in my PlayStation 3 when I'm playing a video game? In a PlayStation 3, an example of that is SimCity. It's an enormous city. I can navigate my way through every bit of it because the PlayStation, the video game, gives me the frame that I need when I'm looking there. If I look somewhere else, it'll create that frame. Well, oddly enough, the universe behaves that way in reality. The universe gives you what you're looking at when you're looking at it. When you're not looking at it, it's not necessarily there.
Our world is pixelated and only assumes definite form when observed. the very same way our computer simulations behave.
The conclusion is inescapable. The universe behaves as a virtual reality. In light of the evidence, this is why this question is now taken seriously by experts. Which brings us to the next question.
The more interesting aspect to that question is, who's the programmer and where's the computer?
If the universe is a simulation, who is the simulator? Should we take the view of Nick Bostrom, that we are being simulated by future humans as an ancestor simulation? Well, the problem with this theory is it really doesn't answer the question. If we are being simulated by future humans, then their world would have to have the same features as ours and be based on qubits, and this would imply they are also a simulation. Using Leibniz's law and discernibility of identicals, it would have to follow that they are also a simulation, if they have the exact same world as ours, just further in the future. If the properties of our world entail that we are a virtual reality, then a world identical to ours would have the same implications, but if their world needs outside processing, they would also need a simulator. And if they are also being simulated by a future civilization, then the cycle continues, and it is nothing more than an infinite regress. Bostrom admits this and says, we would have to suspect that the post-humans running our simulation are themselves simulated beings, and their creators in turn may also be simulated beings. Reality may thus contain many levels. So this amounts to nothing more than an infinite regress. But what if one of the higher levels is not a quantum world, but an actual objective world based on classical physics? Well, this solution creates more problems than it solves. For a quantum world like ours to be simulated in a classical world, all of the qubits would have to be unpacked into classical bits, and this would result in a classical computer hard drive bigger than that which is being simulated, so a computer bigger than the universe itself, which would be absurd to postulate and impossible to build, which leaves us with a different alternative. The universe is being simulated in a mind.
Could what we think is the universe be some sort of vault of heaven rather than a real thing?
Given the problems that result from being simulated on a computer, one can find a much simpler explanation that the universe is being simulated in a mind. This would solve many problems of being simulated on a computer, because a mind has elements of integrated information states and also processes information, and the physics in a dream environment would emerge from information processing and therefore look identical to the conditions of our world as we described earlier. So a dream environment just emerges from Platonic information in a mind, which is essentially the same type of physics we see in a generic information construct, such as the illusion of space and matter and the elements which make it finite and computable. Even more important, a mind, different from the brain in a computer, is an immaterial substance and doesn't require matter to exist. In fact, interestingly enough, matter seems to need mind, since this is what quantum mechanics tells us. Mind is necessary to collapse a wave function for matter to exist.
So recent experiments led by the group at the University of Vienna, Austria, provide the most compelling evidence yet that there is no objective reality beyond what we observe. So it's really the observation that creates the reality. And what they found is that Leggett's inequality is violated as well as Bell's. Even if you allow for instantaneous influences, quantum measurements do not fit with the idea of an objective reality.
So a mind, unlike a computer, doesn't require the existence of particles to be built upon. So given the options, the most likely case is the universe is actually being simulated in an immaterial necessary mind.
An all-powerful, all-knowing, super-intelligent being. An entity whose motives are unfathomable.
It's very important for us physicists to not dismiss ideas just because they are weird. Because if we did, we would have already dismissed atoms, black holes, and all sorts of other marvelous things.
But from this deduction, we can then formulate a simple argument. Premise 1. Simulations can only exist in a computer or in a mind. Premise 2. The universe is a simulation. This, of course, comes from the evidence presented earlier. Premise 3. A simulation on a computer still must be simulated in a mind. This would follow from the infinite regress problem if we were being simulated on a computer. To prevent the infinite regress of endless computer simulations, we eventually have to stop postulating higher levels of computers and stop with a simulation existing in a necessary mind. And we would also have to remember the importance of Occam's razor. If we have to inevitably arrive at the conclusion of existing in a mind, then why even postulate intermediate levels of computer simulations, unless it is necessary to do so? And no reason suggests this. And one can also argue that it may not even be possible to simulate conscious beings in a computer, given this hasn't been demonstrated to be possible, and one can argue that consciousness is more complex than just information processing. So Occam's razor shaves these off. But even if one insists on leaving them there, the universe would still exist in a mind anyway. So inevitably, we have to say premise 4. Therefore, the universe is a simulation in a mind. Premise 5. This mind is what we call God. And the conclusion simply follows.
dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something is actually strange.
I'm sure the title of this video has already frightened many of my subscribers, because the word panentheism sounds like pantheism, and how could I be advocating anything close to that? Well, do not worry, I'm not. Others will be equally frightened, because they'll know that panentheism is usually associated with process theology or open theism. Well, let me dispel that now as well. I'm not advocating process theology or anything that would blur the line between the creator and the created. What I'm advocating is scripturally based, doesn't blur this line, and has been taught by our brethren in the Eastern Orthodox Church. So you might end up agreeing with what I'm teaching here, but simply not like the use of the word panentheism, which is fine. The title is not important, as long as we agree on the doctrine taught. So bear with me and try not to judge too quickly. Now, panentheism is usually associated with process theology or open theism, but by itself, it simply means all in God, or all dependent on God, but that God is greater than the universe. This alone, divorced from process theology and open theism, doesn't seem heretical. It really depends on what we mean in the specifics of this. Now, it is true the word panentheism didn't exist until the German idealist Karl Kraus penned it in the 19th century. So this is why it is usually associated with process theology, or open theism. And these views are definitely heretical forms of panentheism. But not all panentheism is heretical, and I don't advocate the strong sense of it, which tries to unite us with the essence of God. This would be strong panentheism, and it is closer to pantheism, which we all know is the belief that God is the universe, and the universe is God. Strong panentheism moves slightly away from this, which says the universe and God share complete identity, but God is also a personal being. Christopher Layton defines strong panentheism as that which posits that the relationship between the world and God's self is such that God shares in the evolutionary development of the world, that God and the world are somehow necessarily correlated. This I would not advocate as a safe Christian doctrine. What I'm advocating is weak panentheism, which moves closer to dualistic theism. This is the belief many modern Christians have in the West, that God and the world are completely separate entities. God set up creation like a clock and let it go. Now this belief I would say is not heretical, because it affirms a creator-creation distinction, but it does draw close to Stoicism, which places God as a distant being who is cold and indifferent to the affairs of the world, instead of being active and always present in the world. Dualistic theism also doesn't capture the essence of what is taught in Scripture, which I want to argue weak panentheism does. Weak panentheism, or as Callistos Ware defines it as Palamite panentheism, is the belief creation is contingent and distinct from God, but wholly dependent on Him still. They are distinct, but creation is still dependent on Him and cannot exist without His presence. Layton says it is that which would deny such a necessary interdependence between God and the world, and affirm the world is contingent. In this view, creation is not part of God's essence or transcendent being, but creation is not wholly separate from God either, but emerges from and exists through the divine energies of God, not the divine essence of God like in strong panentheism. I advocate this view captures the heart of what is taught in Scripture, as it affirms the creator-creation distinction, but still confirms the Scripture that says we are fully dependent on Him. Acts 17:28 says, "In Him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are His offspring." Here, we see Paul teaches total dependence on God. Without God, we lack even our being. Colossians 1:17 says, "And He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together." Jesus shows us in John 14 that we are utterly connected and dependent on Him. He said, "Yet a little while, and the world will see me no more, but you will see me. Because I live, you will also live. In that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you." Christ doesn't say we are completely separated from Him. There is a clear connection to God, a dependence on Him in all we do. But we cannot forget the other aspect of this. God is completely distinct from His creation. While we are finite, fallible, and contingent, Scripture says He is self-existent, eternal, immutable, and perfect. Paul reminds us there is a clear distinction between how we treat the Creator and the created. so we cannot say creation is one with the essence of God. Yet Scripture does teach we are fully dependent on Him and exist by the divine power of God. Only a weak or Palamite panentheistic outlook can explain this connection, while affirm the distinction. It is the perfect middle. Now, a Palamite panentheistic outlook is the perfect description of an important doctrine taught in the early church, but has been forgotten by many in the West, known as the essence-energy distinction, which was formulated by the Orthodox Archbishop Gregory Palamas and Maximus the Confessor, which was based on the early teachings of Clement of Alexandria and St. Irenaeus. Basically, the essence is completely other, wholly transcendent, outside of the realm of the created, and yet God works in creation and enters into a relationship with us. This is done through the immanent energies of God, but the energies are still fully God. Mike Horton explains it like this: God's energies are radiations of divine glory, but are no more the divine essence than rays are the sun itself. God's uncreated glory emanates, but the essence does not. The energies are God in action. They are not God's essence, but a certain quality of God's self-revelation and saving love. It is through the energies of God that we can partake in the divine nature of God, as Peter says, and share in God's nature by possessing eternal life. If God were just a transcendent essence, how would we come in contact with Him while maintaining a creator-creation distinction? This is why early theologians taught the essence-energy distinction, which Palamite panentheism perfectly describes. We see this in the writings of St. Irenaeus, but more prominently in the writings of Clement of Alexandria, who wrote, "He is far off in essence, but very near in His power, which embraces all things. He is in essence remote, for how is it that which is begotten can have approached the unbegotten? But He is very near in virtue of that power, which holds all things in its embrace." Athanasius the Great, writing later of Christ, said, "In creation He is present everywhere, yet is distinct in being from it, ordering, directing, giving life to all, containing all, yet is He Himself the uncontained, existing solely in His Father. As with the whole, so also is it with the part, existing in a human body, to which He Himself gives life. He is still source of life to all the universe, present in every part of it, yet outside the whole, and He is revealed both through the works of His body and through His activity in the world." Many other early Orthodox writers also confirm this distinction, yet dependence on God. The Archbishop Gregory Palamas is most famous for formalizing what Scripture taught about this distinction. Christopher Layton lays out what Palamas formulated from Scripture. Palamas outlines three types of unity. First, there is a sort of union that is characteristic of the members of the Trinity, a union according to essence. Second, there is a union according to hypostasis. This is the union between God's essence and God's energies that we see in the incarnation of Christ. The third type of unity outlined by Palamas is the unity according to energy. This is the sort of unity envisioned in the theosis, and the sort of unity that exists between creation and God. The unity between the earth and God cannot be the sort of union that God experiences in the Trinity. The creation is not essentially unified with the Godhead. Were that the case, creation would also be divine. Nor is creation unified to God according to hypostasis. This hypostatic union between God and humanity is unique to Christ. As Palamas says himself, three realities pertain to God: essence, energy, and the triad of divine hypostases. As we have seen, those privileged to be united to God, so as to become one spirit with Him. As St. Paul has said, "He who cleaves to the Lord is one spirit with Him," are not united to God with respect to His essence, since all the theologians testify that with respect to His essence, God undergoes no participation. Moreover, the hypostatic union is fulfilled only in the case of the Logos, the God-man. Thus, those privileged to attain union with God are united to Him with respect to His energies. Only a weak or Palamite panentheist outlook can explain what Scripture and the Church Fathers teach. We are united to God through His energies, yet separate from His essence. Christianity is very much a weak panentheistic belief, and this was confirmed by several Church Fathers and seen throughout Scripture. Even Martin Luther's work has been argued to be panentheistic. Luther is quoted as saying, "God must be present in every single creature, in its innermost and outermost being, on all sides, through and through, below and above, before and behind, so that nothing can be truly present and within all creatures than God Himself, with His power." This separated Luther from other reformers who argued the finite could not hold the divine, whereas Musin argues Luther's view was more aligned to panentheism, in that nature could not exist if the Spirit of God was removed. So I think we can safely say a Palamite panentheistic outlook best captures what is taught in Scripture, and many prominent theologians saw this as well and argued we, his creation, are sustained and united by the energies of God, while he is fully transcendent in his essence. Now some may be asking why this is important to point out. Well, first off, in past videos, I've argued quantum physics creates radical implications about how we view reality, leading to an objective form of monistic idealism. Now this has scared many of the Christians who watch my videos, because they are concerned about the implications of giving up dualism and falling into monistic views that lead to open theism. Well, luckily one can easily see that Scripture seems to affirm a Palamite panentheistic outlook, thereby preventing us from sliding into open theism. But on the other side of things, regarding dualistic theism, I believe Christopher Layton makes a good point on this when he concludes his paper by saying, what is Trinitarian panentheism good for? In the West in particular, God's transcendence has been overemphasized and has resulted in precisely the spirit-material dualism that Irenaeus struggled against with the Gnostics. A Trinitarian panentheism struggles with precisely the tension between God's transcendence and his immanence. This struggle is healthy because a Trinitarian panentheism insists on the affirmation of both, and therefore can't succumb to Docetism or Gnostic dualisms, and can affirm with Maximus that nothing within the created order is nearer or further away from God by virtue of the constitution of its being. And eco-theology becomes a necessary part of Christian theology, and not merely an appendage on it. Finally, with respect to natural theology, a Trinitarian panentheism can affirm with Paul that God's power can be seen through the things he has made, and that God is not far from us, for in him we live and move and have our being.
It seems to make sense to me that God is separate from the universe, but also you have to exist, you go all the way back to the beginning.
Right.
You have to exist in something. So how do we deal with that part? You know,
How does he exist in? Say that again.
So the idea of him being separate from his creation makes sense to me, but if you push it all the way back to the beginning, so just the Trinity, seems to me had to exist in something. There had to be some other universe or something that he existed in. So he doesn't just exist in nothing. So how do we deal with that part?
I think the idea there is that, like, our conception that something has to exist in space comes kind of a naive, realistic view that there's like a world that's out there in a sense, right? And so I think the idea with idealism is that sort of turns that on its head, and that the reason that we assume that something has to exist in something else, like, you know, a space-time or something, is due to the idea that space-time has to be something that's objectively out there and kind of a backdrop that things have to happen in. So, like I mentioned, you know, as you see with the physics, the space-time is emergent, and so it actually goes all the way down in the digital physics argument, because the next universe down is going to have qubits as well, and those have to be, otherwise you have this gargantuan computer to explain that. So space-time would ultimately be emergent, and so God would be outside space-time in a sense. And it's a weird way of thinking about it, but you know, we're just tuned with our, you know, intuitions to think of the world in a naive sense where it's out there, and so we then think that God has to be out there in the same sort of way. So. If there is another universe, like if there happens to be a universe that simulates our universe, the whole thing came from this thing called the simulation argument. Nick Bostrom, this idea that in the future we're going to have, you know, really advanced computer games, and those are going to have people inside them that they're going to think, those people are going to think they're real. But you know, if you sell a computer game, you're going to sell thousands and thousands of them, right? And so the thing then is you have hundreds of trillions of people who think they're real people but are actually computer game people, versus one universe that's actually real. And so then the argument was that it's more likely that we're inside of a computer game than the real world. And so some atheists have used that argument to try and argue that that's the explanation for the physics. And so what I was saying is that if that's true, not to say that there is another universe that's simulating ours, but if that is true, that there is another universe, then that universe will also have to have virtual reality properties because because of the qubit problem.
But beyond that, though, I mean, to try to understand God from our finite perspective in our own simulation, it's really impossible. We can't explain where God came from or how it could be there for eternity or where he lives or anything like that's completely beyond mental comprehension.
Yeah,
and I don't think
that's why I was kind of mentioning like our intuitions of the world, that God has to be somewhere, and
they don't have to be. He's beyond our comprehension, and ultimately I think we come to a position where we just say we have no idea.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
And I think that's
we
only can know what God reveals about Himself, and then after that we're just stuck.
Yeah, we're basically
with a big headache. Actually, I mean, try to think about it too hard, and it hurts your brain.
Yeah, it does. Should open the PowerPoint? Okay.
We do that with everything.
All right, so it's actually short PowerPoint because I was hoping to have another video after this, but the energy's essence distinction. This is the idea that you saw in the video. Okay, energy's essence distinction. The universe is dependent on God, but God is not dependent on the universe. So God could exist even if the universe doesn't, but the universe, if God didn't exist, the universe would disappear immediately. So
give us a soundbite on process theology. Say more on it.
Process theology is the idea that the universe God evolves with the universe because the universe is part of God.
So He's learning along with us.
Exactly, and so that leads into open theism, where God doesn't know all possible futures, basically, or He doesn't know the future in all certainty. So that seems to be popular in some philosophic areas for some reason. So yeah, that rules out process theology because God stays as He is, and He can create the universe and make the universe disappear, and He's still independent from it, even though He contains it. And then when you add idealism into this, it kind of sheds a little extra light on this. Idealism, this means that the universe is comprised of God's thoughts because, it's inside of His mind. Those are His thoughts. He's generating a simulation from His thoughts. So then simple idea here, God's thoughts are His energies, God's I am is His essence, and so from that we conclude that creation is not divine, because oh, is it quiet? Yeah. Okay, I'll bring that up closer. There we go. That better? That worse? I think I put it on the wrong. Better? Testing? That better? Work now? Wait. Testing.
Hold it, that might.
Sorry about that. So creation is not divine, and the example would be Micawber, a character in one of Dickens' novels, is in Dickens' mind, but he's not Charles Dickens himself. So he's a separate being that is contingent upon Dickens. And idealism explains the nature of the energy's essence dependency. If God were to stop simulating the universe, it would blink out of existence immediately. So it's kind of explains why the universe would disappear. You're wondering, well, why would a material universe just disappear if God did, stop running it? And when you realize it's because it's made out of God's thoughts rather than being material. So it's right there. An idealism in the universe is something contingent on God rather than a part of God, in the same way that a program is not part of the CPU. You turn your computer off and the computer game ends, even though the computer's still there. And so because of this, idealism fits better with weak panentheism than strong panentheism, because it explains the nature of this dependency. It's like a one-way dependency. Then Paul actually showed me this the other day. This is a quote from Ellen White, where she kind of backs this up. He said, but his energy is still exerted in upholding the objects of his creation. It is not because the mechanism that has once been set in motion continues to act by its own inherent energy. The pulse beats and breath follows breath. But every breath, every pulsation of the heart is an evidence of the all-pervading care of Him in whom we live and move and have our being. So in the context he was arguing with this and was against people who try and use science to argue that miracles are impossible. So basically, saying that material forces or laws rule out the possibility of miracles. And material creation then is not something that's run by material forces, and it's thus run by immaterial forces that can override matter, and they kind of come from behind matter. And so from that it follows that matter is not self-existent, and furthermore, given creation, the fact that matter was created at some point entails that this one-way dependency exists. It's not something that just exists inherently. It's something that has to have a contingent existence on a creator. And then that brings us to the Big Bang, which is actually my next video, and I just want to run through a couple of slides here so we can get to that. A couple ways to interpret this. There's Russell Humphrey's view. He calls this white hole cosmology, and basically where creation happened from a white hole that we're close to. And so from that, there's 13.7 billion years in the Big Bang are from the reference frame of the rest of the universe, and us being close to the white hole see it from 6 days due to time dilation. And another possible view some people hold is Gerald Schrader's view, and he kind of turns that upside down and says it's the same time dilation mechanism, it's backwards. It's 13.7 billion years from our reference frame and 6 days from God's. And he calculated this because he took the 13.7 billion years and divided by the Big Bang expansion factor and got 6 days, which was kind of an interesting result. And then he corresponded each day with an age when he did the math. So then there's a third view, that is that Genesis wasn't referring to cosmological creation, just Earth. So, and the Big Bang was separate. That was separate creation before. The takeaway points from this, though, are that all these views entail Hubble expansion. The universe is always expanding, regardless of which one of those views or maybe other views you might take. And when you run Hubble expansion backwards in time, this means that the universe had an absolute beginning at a finite time into the past. And interestingly, Hubble expansion was actually hinted at in the Bible. And God stretches out the heavens, and you see this in, I'm actually kind of surprised how many verses I found this in. It's Job 9:8, Psalms 1:0. Well, you can see them all up there. So, all right, now let's watch the video.
Approximately 13.7 billion years ago, the fabric of space-time burst into being, marking the beginnings of physical existence. This event, known as the Big Bang, has since been firmly established by physics, despite initial resistance from academics. For more on the cosmology of the Big Bang and the past incompleteness of space-time, I recommend you check out the channel of my friend, Olaf Nebren, aka the Theistic Thinker in the annotation. The Big Bang is popularly used by apologists in the famous Kalam cosmological argument. However, something far more fascinating and potent appears to lurk in this argument that has not been fully explored, perhaps due to the dualist inhibitions of its proponents. If properly understood, I believe it would dash to pieces the false idol of the materialists, the assumed nature of their so-called physical world. And so by all means, let the smashing begin. As will be shown, the materialist equating of the natural with the physical will be seen to be either an incomplete picture of the natural, or a picture inconsistent with the physical evidence. It appears even the physical universe itself suffers from a kind of Gödelian incompleteness. Its existence cannot be explained from within itself, as will be seen by a series of 3 options. The first option is to reject the Big Bang in favor of both physicalism and naturalism. Such attempts were made by the late Fred Hoyle. Unfortunately, the evidence was compelling enough, and his career soon fell into disrepute. Later attempts at cyclic universes have all failed due to various considerations of entropy, and at long last, even inflationary multiverses were shown to terminate at a finite time into the past. Our best picture of cosmology now tells us that there simply is no evidence for an eternal universe. Our options for denying a beginning to the universe are now very few. Perhaps we can play infantile games of semantics, merely presupposing that the universe must be eternal because we have defined it as all that exists. But if we are to choose science over semantics, this first option must be rejected. Secondly, we could adopt physicalism and the Big Bang at the expense of naturalism. What exactly do I mean by this? If physical spacetime is truly fundamental, then it must have come into existence out of nothing, and for no underlying naturalistic reason. However, this is exactly the sort of ex nihilo creation event that many atheists identify as supernatural and unscientific when asserted by theists. One might argue that the universe did indeed come from nothing via fluctuations in the quantum vacuum, but prior to the creation of spacetime, no space to contain such a vacuum existed.
And I've never seen anything more harebrained than the ideas that came up with the Big Bang starting as some kind of quantum mechanical, you know, just nothing turning into something.
One could also assert that there was nothing before the Big Bang, as one could say that time did not exist before space-time began. But this merely sidesteps the larger issue, which is why the universe began to exist at all. Even without a cause in the usual sense, the universe must have an underlying reason for its existence, unless we are to defer to the same supernaturalism that the materialist wishes to avoid. Which leaves us with our third option. We must reject physicalism in favor of a naturalistic Big Bang. But as you will quickly discover, this is no ordinary naturalism. In fact, it is, for all practical purposes, a naturalism in name only. On this view, we must accept that the Big Bang came into existence for an underlying cause that is ontologically continuous with the physical universe, yet more fundamental than it. That is, that there is a nature more fundamental than the physical, which in turn is a mere emergent effect. Or to put it more bluntly, that which we call the physical universe is a mere illusion. To the horror of many, modern quantum gravity research reveals that this is in fact the correct option. Everything we refer to as physical, be it spacetime or the matter in it, are not fundamental, but emerge from the non-physical information underlying them.
The future, at least of this development, will be that we start actually with information. So information is going to be our starting point. And space-time is not something that we start with. We forget about what space is and what time, and then somehow the information, by thinking about how much information is, what information is doing, then the space-time will, what we call, be emergent. It will come out of just a bunch of zeros and ones.
For a quantum theory of gravity is that space-time is not fundamental. That space-time is, if you like, an effective emergent description from something else that underlies it. And that something else could be information in the following way. That just space doesn't exist. Describe world without space using model.
Of course, this does not in itself make the case of the apologists. But rest assured, the most undeniable of facts will soon uncover the nature of the prime mover. The French philosopher René Descartes once argued that even if the world was an illusion, his own mind could not be. For if there was doubt, there was also a doubter. His statement of this in the Cogito formed a foundation upon which all other knowledge could be grounded. If we do not know that we exist, we cannot claim to know the statements of mathematics or logic. We cannot know the truth about science or philosophy, nor the facts of physics, chemistry, or neuroscience. In fact, if we claim to doubt the knower, we must also doubt all knowledge altogether. But given the state of physics, we are faced with an interesting dilemma. The world is an illusion after all, and yet our minds appear not to be. Thus, either we completely reject the existence of the mind, or we assert the primacy of consciousness. The former option has been adopted by zombies and eliminative materialists. But for those who do not wish to descend into complete mindlessness, we must accept the latter view. Attempts at sidestepping by redefining the mind as a process or property will not work either. Upon reflection, such statements are readily recognized as being as incoherent as the statements, "A car is the process of driving," or "A rose is the property of redness." Needless to say, identifying oneself with an adjective or verb should be rejected as conceptually meaningless gibberish by any thinking person, not blinded by the modern dogmas. And so we arrive at the inexorable conclusion. That which is not an illusion can only be more fundamental than that which is. Eschewing solipsism, the universe is found to be an emergent effect of its first cause, a greater mind, a truth accepted by no less than Max Planck and obviated by mountains of evidence. But there is also something curious about this reference to information as being involved in the creation of the universe, something that strikes a resonant chord with the religious beliefs of many. At the age of 14, I recognized the incoherence of the substance dualism I had been taught. Instead, I reinvented what I would later come to know as neutral monism, the view that both matter and mind reduce to some third mutual substance. After some thought, I decided that this third substance must be information. It was then that I noticed a somewhat peculiar pattern in what I had been taught. Various verses in the Bible appeared to reflect this conclusion. Hebrews 11:3 stated that the universe was created by the Word of God. John 1:1 indicated that in the beginning was the Word. And of course the opening passage of Genesis recounts God's creation of the universe through speech.
We are told in some ancient creation myths that God spoke the universe into being. It turns out that such a concept is not so mythological after all. If the holographic universe operates as a quantum computer, then God could have created the universe by thinking, or perhaps figuratively speaking, the lines of quantum computer code that program our holographic universe into existence. But you might ask, is our universe actually a quantum computer? Experts in quantum information theory, such as MIT's Seth Lloyd, say yes.
Yeah, well, so I've argued that the universe is effectively a quantum computer. In fact, not even effectively, actually is a quantum computer.
But one does not speak matter, one speaks words, and words are, of course, information. So where might they have gotten such an idea? At the time, I didn't think much of this until years later. While doing research for one of my science fiction novels, I stumbled across something I did not expect regarding an ancient Jewish tradition known as the Kabbalah. I otherwise would have said nothing until I later discovered that, much to my surprise, one of my childhood heroes had noticed the same thing.
I'm a theoretical physicist, and I like to say that I walk in the footsteps of giants like Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr. I'm not a philosopher. However, I am rather dazzled by the fact that many of the basic mysteries that we find in string theory and the theory of everything seem to be mirrored in the Zohar and in the Kabbalah.
According to the Kabbalah, the physical universe is actually an illusion coded in language, programmed with Hebrew letters spoken by God.
The highest Kabbalistic secret. That is, that physical matter can be transformed molecule by molecule by the use of incantations of ancient Hebrew letters, and that the nature of reality is really an illusion.
And does modern physics corroborate this view? Let us hear the truth from them in their own words.
Well, so I've argued that the universe is effectively a quantum computer. In fact, not even effectively, actually is a quantum computer.
Is that there are these incredible pictures that contain all the information of a set of equations that are related to string theory. And it's even more bizarre than that, because when you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web. And so I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the matrix or not.
So recent experiments led by the group at the University of Vienna, Austria, provide the most compelling evidence yet that there is no objective reality beyond what we observe. So it's really the observation that creates the reality. And what they found is that Leggett's inequality is violated as well as Bell's. Even if you allow for instantaneous influences, quantum measurements do not fit with the idea of an objective reality.
There were physicists in the movie, and they want to know they were inside the matrix. How could they do that? Well, one way might be to try to detect computer codes in the equations that describe their world. But that's what I've just proposed.
And do you accept these scientist statements? And do you accept these facts of reality concealed from you? Then perhaps we should start by asking the next logical question.
Then somehow one is more real than the other. The instruction is the reality, the realization of the instruction, the video game is the illusion. How do you get away from that? Ed first and then Seth.
Okay. Well, the more interesting aspect to that question is, who's the programmer and where's the computer?
If the curious similarities Kaku refers to are more than just uncanny coincidences or fodder for science fiction novels, then perhaps the answer to that question lies in the very same source of those parallels.
With 32 mystical paths of wisdom, engraved Yah, the Lord of Hosts.
If you like this video, subscribe, and don't forget to check out my novel, Alaris, The Lances of Light, on Amazon Kindle in the description below. Now you can find us on Facebook at Idealism and Science versus Atheism. This mind is the matrix of all matter.
May I ask a simple factual question, please?
Okay.
You've introduced us Palamas and his Palamitic panentheism. Locate him for me, at least, in time and location. Where did he live? Where did he work and teach?
That's the problem, actually, because that was Inspiring Philosophy's video, and I don't know, to be honest. kind of ashamed to say that, but
it's not a name familiar to
No,
to
I
me,
mean,
at
it
least.
wasn't to me until Inspiring Philosophy introduced him to me, and I think I did a little bit of research into it a while back, but I don't remember him recently, or where it was from recently.
I think there are people here in this room now who need to know more about Palamite.
I think he's. I'm pretty certain he's Eastern Orthodox, but other than that,
1200 BC, which is after the split.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense.
You see,
yeah, I brought the video along, and I was like, I thought it was a good video, but I brought it in here, and I looked at the other two, and I kind of I should have actually picked Inspiring Philosophy's brain on that yesterday, but
there's a man who is historically important in the Adventist community. His name was John Harvey Kellogg.
Right, I've heard of that.
And he was a very great man in his time,
right,
who in fact laid the foundations of the Adventist significance in health as a trust from the Creator.
Right.
Yes. The trouble is that later in his career, Kellogg, now you may not know this, but Kellogg fell into disrepute in the church because he was accused of being a pantheist or something like that.
Right.
I would think that, judged correctly, Kellogg should be rather categorized as a Palamite panentheist, and he would have escaped quite a lot of the condemnation which he received in his time.
Yeah, Yeem told me about that, and I had heard vaguely about that, but he basically said that the issue, I think, was that Kellogg was kind of going along the lines of approaching Christian Science, essentially, and it was getting more into like a strong panentheist thing where the creation was divinized along with the Creator.
Well,
that's what I had heard. That's what Paul told me.
I'm just suggesting that
Yeah.
we need to take a second look
Yeah.
in the light of what you've been telling us this morning, that this panentheism has its very defensible side.
Right. Yeah. So I think that was the thing, was that Paul had mentioned that he was getting closer to strong panentheism, and it was kind of mingling into Christian Science in a sense, which obviously has some issues. So.
The following comment, namely mine, will be made by someone who stumbled onto philosophy and all this quantum science sort of accidentally, but I sure got interested in it, and I can't help but think while I'm hearing all this, especially your reference to the early church fathers, and how, at least my understanding of what you presented, these early church fathers were really quite remarkable and perhaps crucial in understanding such concepts as energy versus reality and so forth.
Energy versus essence.
But isn't it true that all of this concern about what is an illusion and what is real and what is virtual was far more ancient than they, and certainly we associate the word Plato with all of this and his remarkable obsession with what was reality and what wasn't. He had special terms invented for all this, and in order he with several others had to invent things like the prime mover, but since they in essence really were chock full of intelligence but were not intelligent, they were so intelligent, which is kind of an irony. They had to invent other entities such as daemons and sub-creators, and it goes on forever, and those who are really familiar on a PhD level with philosophy can recite for me all these various entities that Plato and others came up with. Now, you have also pointed out that in the New Testament, various what you refer to as hints of thinking along these lines. But, and likewise, Sister White also, I'll always call her sister, that tells you how old I am, used vocabulary which I don't think she even herself knew what she was talking about. It was somehow or another accurate in terms of your setting. What I'm getting at is that the real obsession with the intricacies of energy versus emergence versus this, that, and the other that you've been reviewing so effectively for us, thanks to your video, came on a scene in the 3rd century. And that in turn happened when our early church fathers learned more than they learned from Christ. And they got it all from the Greek philosophers. They became more versed in Greek philosophy, as versed in Greek philosophy, as they were in what Christ himself said. It remained not for what Christ said, even in John 14 and 15, where he says, I and thee and I and thee, and it goes on like that forever, and it's so confusing. It remained for those early church fathers who had been so educated in Greek philosophy to clarify it all. I wonder what that means.
Well, I guess they're interpreting it they have ideas in the Bible, but then there's a different set of ideas that come from Greek philosophy regarding metaphysics, and they're trying to think of it in terms of that framework, as it were, to try and they're thinking of it in terms of the ideas of their day to try and. Now, obviously, the Bible wasn't a philosophy textbook, so I guess they were trying to hammer metaphysics out of it and then try and figure out how the appropriate theological distinctions applied in the philosophy as well, and so on. So, John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
The thought came to my mind, and let me see if I can put it into words. That's always my difficulty. This is the digital age. We're talking about information, and even in biology we're talking about information. And I kind of feel like here we are, well, can I use a big $1,000 million word, anthropomorphizing God? We're kind of creating him, recreating, trying to understand God. We're creating him out of what our own knowledge, or trying to understand him from our latest knowledge, which is. Does that make any sense?
I see what you're saying. Like we're trying to put God in a box of science, as it were. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, and a little bit. So I'm cautious about this, because God is. The Bible also says he is past finding out. And I think these scientists want to try to quantify anything that they're looking at to explain the universe, and that would include God, even if it's he was immaterial. So
maybe
I'm just cautious about that.
A way to look at that, I guess, would be to think of the energies essence distinction. And, we're only privy to the matrix, basically, the physics of the matrix, and that's God's energies. And so from that we can see that those are thoughts, and the thoughts must belong to a mind. And so the mind of God's I am, for example, is separate, and that's something that is outside of the creation.
I see a lot of good things in it, a lot of plausible, maybe they're going in the right direction, but, the devil's in there too.
Right.
He's going to get his more than his hand in things and try to twist, and he's already been doing that. So, got to really be careful.
I think one way, and this was my professor, Professor Moreland pointed this out. He had an argument from consciousness, and he also had this argument from information. The idea that information exists in the universe implies that information is something that is known by a mind, right? And so, because there's information that exists apart from us, that means that God's mind, there has to be another transcendent mind that knows it. And so this kind of just takes it to the next level and says,
Yeah,
well, it's not just that information exists in the universe, that the universe is nothing but information. And so from that we can see that it's...
I like that idea in and of itself, but where we go with it is...
Yeah, I guess the thing that would help there would be that, it's not God's I am you're studying, it's God's thoughts, and we're basically deducing in an indirect sense that because the universe is this way, it has to be inside of a mind, but we're not actually studying the mind itself, we're studying the
As long as if we're keeping in mind that God He's infinite.
Yes.
He's far beyond we knew a little bit like we knew about like this before. Now we know maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's it. So just I'm cautious about it.
That's a good idea.
Mindful of humility.
Yep. Oh.
Yeah, there's a term that gets thrown around an awful lot, which I've often found very troublesome, and that is the term the universe. Sometimes people use the word nature, or sometimes they're used interchangeably. Now, I've come up with 3 ways. Now, the first video you showed might provide an alternative to what I'm saying. I don't know yet, because I never thought about it that way. But the term the universe can be used in 3 ways that make sense to me in a vacuous sense. And that means it's a shorthand or a cipher denoting the aggregate of everything that is, or everything that we want to talk about. Okay, but in that case, it's simply a shorthand term, so it's easier to say than to say all the other stuff. Okay. Secondly, it's a scientific term of art. Now, I assume that when scientists use the word universe, they know exactly what they mean. Maybe I'm wrong in my assumption, but in that case, the word the universe has to be circumscribed by the method of science and remain within the universe of discourse of science. Now, the third way is the way it becomes very troublesome, and that is in a monistic sense. Now, there's 3 ways that this is used in a monistic sense: by materialism ideology, by panpsychism, or in an ontological sense. Now, the latter, the ontological sense, that would amount to the assertion that everything that is has the same mode of being. Descartes thought that everything that is has only one of two possible modes of being, res cogitans or res extensa. Spinoza liked the word the number 1 better than you, so he said that everything has only one mode of being. So I would submit that if that's the way you're using it, they should stop reading Descartes and Spinoza and probably start reading more of Heidegger. Okay, now the other way is materialism or panpsychism. Now, in this case, the word universe is being reified. It's being made into an object as if it were a substance or something existing by itself. So for instance, in the New Age, we're always told that there's only one thing, and everything that we experience is a manifestation of this one thing. Or people like Wayne Dyer or those guys say, well, the universe is compassionate, the universe cares about you, and so on and so forth. Now, in this case, it sounds like there's a basic category mistake being made. Using the example from Gilbert Ryle, the concept of mind, there's a professor who takes his son. The son wants to see the university, so he takes him to see the university. And he points out the science building and the humanities building and the chapel and so on. And the son says, well, now you've showed me all the buildings. Where's the university? I want to see the university. Well, in this case, there's a basic category mistake being made, which I think is the same kind of category mistake being made by people who want to reify it in order to make it subserve some ideology, whether it be materialism or panpsychism or something else. Now, somebody like Stephen Hawking could say, he was asked, do you believe in God? And he says, yes, I believe I believe in God, if by God you mean the mathematical structure of the universe. Well, now, obviously, 90% of the believers don't mean God by that. They mean nothing like that. So it sounds like what Stephen Hawking is doing, and what many do, is they purport to be talking the language of science, but the metaphysical or the monistic sense is kind of hanging as a parasite onto that, so the distinction is not being made. I'd be interested to know your take on this.
Which, on Hawking's concept?
Well, no, and in the idea that sometimes the word universe is reified. Instead of being confined to a vacuous use or the scientific use, it's being looked upon as if it were a thing in itself about which you could talk.
Two things about that. You have the example of the university with all the buildings, right? So another word would be, you would think of yourself as a being, right? But if I ask where is you, I could point to you, but then we break it down into yourself down into cells, and so where is you in the cells? And so in a sense, I mean, I think a composite thing could be seen as a thing as well. Just because it's composite doesn't mean it's not a thing onto its own. You know, the planet, for example, is a thing, and that has a lot more than just, you know, buildings and a university in it. So.
No,
and then, it was the other. The other thing was that there was another sense in that you could think the universe as a thing, in that it's finite, and you know, it started at a discrete point in the past, and then it's contained to a single space-time manifold, and so the space-time manifold and everything in it could be thought of as this universe. And in that way, you could think of it as a thing, much in the same way you could think of the world as a thing.
Just a question along a little sideline. Not much has been said here about time. Scripture speaks about God existing forever. In this whole system here of holograms and so on, is time a factor that's a result of just concepts we have, or is it for real? Is there no past, present, or future? How might time fit in this picture here?
Well, there are a couple views on time. This is kind of interesting because it showed up in a course of mine this last semester. There's the A theory and the B theory, where they have A theory says that the flow of time is real and there's only the present in existence, and then the B theory says that the flow of time is kind of an illusion, and the past, present, and future are laid out much in the same way that points on a film strip would be laid out. And that's actually the preferred model in physics, but there are some, like someone said in quantum gravity, Fatini Markopoulou was suggesting that you could have space be an illusion, but not time, because you'd have to have space-time. There's you actually divide into two kinds of time. There's an emergent time that comes along with our space-time, and there's a more fundamental time that I guess would be like another dimension of time or another mode of time or something that space-time emerges from, and that I guess that could be God's time. So I think God would be eternal in that, and then of course outside of time in our sense, you could see past, present, and future simultaneously.
The comments earlier by the gentleman who was sitting here, I guess what God is. Well, there was some comments over there too about whether he was material or non-material. I've always tended to believe it seemed much to make more sense in any way you look at it. It seems like God is not material at all, because I think with the any kind of matter, you've got limitations. You can't have a being that has no limitations with as long as he's material. Plus, another problem is that if God is not a created being, which I don't think anyone believes that believes God. And of course, if you believe God, then you're already there. But since nobody created him, he's eternal. Plus, there's other problems with materials, that materials don't stay the same eternally. They change or something. There's more risk to it anyway. So that was one comment about that.
Okay. Question about that at all, or you want? I don't know.
I don't know. From your studies, has that come up, or is that?
The idea of matter being.
Well, yeah,
limiting?
more or less. I mean, to me, I think of God as more like a sort of more of an energy.
Yeah, basically matter.
Of intelligence and intelligent energy, essentially. More or
Yeah,
less.
matter was thought to be. I mean, like, for the longest time, I thought that matter was a thing that just existed on its own right, and then, quantum mechanics came along, and you saw Max Planck's quote there, where he's saying that matter doesn't really have its own existence. It's a emergent effect of a mind, which he said this mind is the matrix of all matter. And I actually heard he was a Christian, believe it or not, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and also, it seems like with any kind of material thing, then time kind of enters the picture with material things, because they always have a clock associated with anything that's of matter.
Right, but then of course, that's why there's creation. There's no matter, then there's matter. The next abracadabra, God speaks it into existence in the light.
And then the other interesting, well, in your videos here, I mean, there's a lot of things, but in quantum theories that, as far as what we are, we could be in a computer, we could be a computer simulation, we could, all these things. But, you start thinking of these things, and ultimately, what does it really matter? You kind of conclude that there's other things that actually matter more. Then you can conclude that maybe reality is a little bit overrated. And because essentially that people, they pride themselves on, well, I'm speaking, they want to be speaking facts. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the truth and the reality and the facts are kind of all different things, or at least facts and reality and facts and the truth. But
disproportion between facts and reality. I don't know what to say about that.
Well, facts are things that man has written down. Well, these things. This is what we observable things, like science.
What we think is the case, like we're writing.
Right.
It's the facts that may change the next paradigm as it comes along, and so on.
I mean, quantum physics doesn't fit a lot of so-called
That is
facts.
an interesting point. Kind of, you're making kind of an existential point. It seems, where like it's coming all to be an illusion anyway, and it could be this kind of illusion or that kind of illusion, and so therefore, it's better. Basically, a relationship with God is better than just trying to find meaning in.
Like connecting this to God as well, as far as reality, truth, or whatever. Just logically, I believe that logically you could come to the conclusion it's better to believe in God, whether we're a computer simulation, whether there is a God or whether there is not a God. Because if you don't believe in a God, then you believe that if you want to believe the other philosophy, that we're an accident, life is an accident, kind of a freak of nature, then there's no purpose, and there's no purpose to your life, and there's no good and bad either. Mm-hmm. So then you've created a world that could be horrible.
Yep. That's actually what's so dangerous about materialism, is people get this idea that everything can be explained by matter, and then because of that, well, if that's the case, then it's a free-for-all, because there's no purpose to anything. Purpose is just a construct that evolved or something, and it's not really real, and there is no God, and next thing you know, if God is dead, then everything is permitted, and you have madness.
One other thing I think is interesting in this regard, the passage that you quoted from Ellen White is not the only one. There are a number of them in her kind of what you call major books that all make more or less the same point. And then there are some other ones that make that same point using slightly different words. And I think it's important for us to realize that one of the reasons for arguing this way is so that people don't say, well, matter wouldn't allow the Red Sea to be crossed. Matter wouldn't allow Jesus to be resurrected. Matter wouldn't allow the miracles of Jesus in general. Matter wouldn't allow the miracles of the apostles. The whole biblical account, kind of once you let go of that, it goes up in smoke. Mm-hmm. And you know, it was interesting that it was remarked on that one of the things that thinking this way could do is to limit God, whereas I see it precisely the reverse. One of the things about thinking this way is that you stop limiting God, because if it's his
computer game,
then he can put anything he
program
jolly
anything
well
in there.
pleases into it.
Yeah, it was funny because an atheist actually complained to me that the resurrection was scientifically impossible because it caused, you know, like cells will decay; they can't reverse after 3 days or something like that. And I'm saying, well, those are material level laws, and you keep going down, and you get down, you know, to biochemistry. You go down to that, you get subatomic physics, quantum physics. It is quantum physics, really, subatomic physics, and then finally you get to holography at the bottom, and said, well, the bottom law is holography, and with that you can, you know, you can make any image out of a hologram, and you know, and the holographic principle is just a bunch of information on the 2D bound, so a guy could just reprogram that and hack the hologram, and then Jesus is alive again, and like, what's the problem with that? And he didn't like that kind of line of reasoning too much. He's like, it was kind of funny because he actually seemed like shut his mind off when I brought that up. He was like, we know from science that this is impossible. He just kind of went back and repeated what he said before without paying attention to, you know.
And that's one of
this
the
leaves it
reasons.
open-ended, really. God can program in anything he wants. So
that's one of the reasons that I find it fascinating that when Ellen White talks about all these things, it's 90+% in the context of, you know, the literal week, the time before the flood, the kinds of things that people will say, well, they couldn't happen because science just won't allow us to believe that. And
I won't say what this was because it's probably going on YouTube and people are going to, you know, atheists will eventually watch this, I'm guessing. But I've actually personally seen phenomena that on multiple occasions, like to the point where I've gotten used to it, that certain institutions actually try to spend their entire lives debunking, and I find this hilarious that they're wasting their time because I have a pretty good idea how it even works given the physics I've explained, and I'm like, they're spending their entire time trying to debunk this, and I'm like, you guys have no idea how things really work.
that's true. Many of the critiques are built on over 100-year-old physics.
Yep. Many of the intuitions also.
This point here that it was in the first video, I think is really the most disturbing thought in this whole presentation here. I watched them last night, and I appreciate these last comments here especially that has been shared. What is reality, and how do we define that? You know, I am just really shocked, I guess, that credibility is put to this matter of virtual reality, and that what we think of as being real is just virtual. How in the world can we make this kind of a deduction?
Well, I guess the thing was that there are you think that, you know, idealism, like whether the world is a dream or not, is something that you could never figure out, right? Like it seems just wacky at first, but then I guess the idea is that it's not something that is scientifically, it's not something that's like beyond science, just completely just mental imaginings. The idea is that when you look closely at it, you kind of you get past the surface, the weirdness of it, the fact that it seems bizarre and crazy. You see that, well, a dream environment is going to behave slightly differently than a material world, and that, you know, a dream actually is based on different principles. Basically, it's not that, you know, you can just dream anything. What the catch is, anything you dream is going to have these. It's going to be based on information construct of some kind. It's not reducible to matter. It's reducible to ideas. Because it's reducible to ideas, it has a different kind of different kind of processing, a different kind of physics that emerges out of it. And then what we find when we look very closely at the physics of our world is that it reduces down to that.
Are we attributing reality then to dreams, and that dreams really, you know, is projecting reality?
Well, think of it this way. Remember I said that the physics was reducing everything to information?
Yes.
So when you have information, it's just, sense perceptions and so on, ideas and sense perceptions. And so when you're in a dream, that's exactly what you experience as well, right? Ideas and sense perceptions. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that a dream is as real as this world per se. It's kind of a simulation within a simulation, a computer game being played inside of a computer game. But it's, when you think of it as all reducible to information anyway, then the issue of, worrying about real versus virtual kind of disappears because reality is just information. And so then our way of categorizing those two or differentiating those two kind of disappears.
And then the thought of, if we don't think about something, if we don't see something, then it's not real. It ceases to exist. That thought, is this sane thinking?
I know. It's actually funny because, this is all physics. This is high-end physics, but a couple of atheists have complained about this to me because I've gotten this humongous following, well, not humongous, but between me and Aspiring Philosophy, it's gotten pretty big following on YouTube over this. And I made this joke about how some people have accused me of plotting to induce mass schizophrenia on the global populace. And I said something like, and then I responded, everything is proceeding as planned, moo-ha-ha.
Well, my question also is, when you go beyond physics and science, and then you deal in the matter of science fiction, and then try and blend the two, it just is beyond credibility.
Well, I must say that this took the atheists on YouTube for quite a shock when it first came. They thought they were on top of everything. They were quite smug, and then we kind of nuked them from left field. And it was rather amusing to watch it. It does stretch the. It seems like it's a little too hard, a little crazy at first to believe.
And then we try and reduce or fit God into that. I think there's a dangerous ground.
Well, I think that was what the lady said before, is that it gives you a way of thinking about God, but the thing is it doesn't actually get you to God himself, because God is, the essence behind the creation, and so it's an indirect deduction because, there's information which is a conscious state, and because there's information there, then it means there has to be a mind that knows it. So it's kind of I guess in a way it's adding an argument actually that Moreland had argued, but then adding it to another level, because you're saying it's instead of just there's information that exists, it's all information, and it gives you a. And then maybe it goes a little. Maybe it does seem to prod in a little too far. I'm guessing. I don't know, but I suppose that might be one concern. But I guess I don't know. It's an interesting thought. I guess I don't know.
And then to reduce humans and to reduce this world and the universe to a virtual universe. It's not real. It's all a holographic dream. This is just, it's beyond science.
It's scary, I know. Well, I know. It does seem pretty scary, and I actually had some atheists complain that they're pointing to people like Brian Greene and Michio Kaku, these famous big-name scientists. And these guys are not, theists per se. I think Kaku might have identified as a pantheist, but other than that, they're not really, theists. But they're saying this stuff, and then I had these atheists complain that they're all quacks. Well, and one guy actually said in that last video where I brought up Michio Kaku saying about the Kabbalah thing, and the guy was atheist was critiquing my video, and then he quotes me saying, "One of my childhood heroes," and he has in caption, parentheses, Michio Kaku, and then he underneath that he says, "That explains oh so very much."
Well, Kaku is very well known in science.
And he actually infuriates a lot of atheists, not directly, but like because of the stuff that he.
Well, the thing of it is, and I think that this is the part that people have to understand, is that the science, specifically the physics, is forcing us into this way of looking at things.
Yeah.
It's and that's the key, and that's one of the reasons why we played the physics video first, and then dealt with the theology afterwards, because it makes no sense to wrestle with the theology until you realize that the physics does force us into looking at, if not a complete video thing, at least a computer assisted, because there are things that happen in physics that should not happen under standard classical mechanics. They just shouldn't. And this is the key. The people who are making these arguments are 100 years out of date, literally.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that the physics is forcing us to this conclusion. And there's actually an atheist that was on my channel a while back, and he was a little recalcitrant, but he was open-minded enough to be honest. And I said, well, this guy named Lee Small happens to be an atheist, but he wrote a book, explaining that space-time is reducible to information, and don't take my word for it. Go read the book. And then he came back about half a year later and said, well, I'm still an atheist, but you were right about that information thing. Like, thanks you for opening my mind. And then I brought him a little farther with the quantum mind thing. Then I made the digital physics argument, my video on the digital physics argument. And that night actually, he told me on Facebook, this is completely insane, but I can't seem to find any way out of it. And at that point, he became an idealist. And now I think he was a Catholic before, and so now, like 3 months later, he's back to being a Catholic for being an atheist. just 3 months earlier. And now, get this, he actually lives in like Oregon, and they have a TEDx center there near his town, and he has an updated version of the digital physics argument, and he wants to take it. He's a physics student. He wants to take it to TEDx. So I'm kind of excited to see where that goes. He's got.
Thank you. Could you summarize this stuff by saying it's like a bug in the matrix?
Not so much a bug. Bug would be more like something that isn't supposed to be there. That's a glitch. But this is more of a artifact of simulation. When you have a computer program, there are certain parameters. Just because there's something running the
right. So like that list of 11 items. Would those be like bugs in the matrix, if you know what I mean?
Bugs in a sense, yes. They're artifacts that would only appear in virtual realities and not in physical realities.
Those are clues. Okay.
Yeah.
And another question. Would you say that information itself can only come from a mind?
Well, the idea of information is that it informs, right? And it doesn't make any sense to inform something that isn't conscious or intelligent. So, when you have information, I tell you something, you're being informed. Your mind is being informed. So the whole concept of information is that it implies a mind to be informed. So, or they have the knowledge.
Yeah, we've been looking at that information in biology lately, and
right.
It seems to me like that.
On a material framework, if one just assumes it's mind independent and all that, take the standard assumption, then yes, there is no actual information in the DNA. The information comes when your mind is interpreting what base pairs and codons are doing what and creating what amino acids and so forth. But yeah, I mean that's the information is kind of in your interpretation of it, I guess.
Okay, but so what do you mean that what we think of as information in the DNA would be evidence of God putting it there?
I think so. It's highly. It's obviously very complex, and it's actually there was an interesting. I forget where I saw this, but it was a paper online a couple of years back, and it was some government scientists that were looking at this, and someone was saying that they found artificial patterns in the human genome, and it was really spooky. Like it was. I had to dig that up again, but it was weird. No, that actually is kind of straight out of science fiction. So yeah, highly ordered information in DNA would be a sign of intelligence.
It seems that many of our problems arise because we're trying to use the language of science to do ontology. Now, ontology is prior to science because all science proceeds using ontological presuppositions.
Right. There's philosophy first, and then there's science.
Right. Now, going back to what Dr. Geem just said, it seems that just by doing science, we're constantly beating down the barriers of science. And I would interpret that, which is true, and I would interpret that to mean that we need to rethink the ontological presuppositions that we're using in order to do science.
I think, yeah, we do basically. Like we're assuming that it's material, and so we have to shift. The whole framework that we were using to categorize things, and it doesn't fit, and people are trying to shoehorn it in, and they're coming up with more and more contrived explanations for things. And I actually made this one video a while back called "Divinely Planted Quantum States," and basically people would, after one quantum experiment would come out, they would redefine what they meant by matter in materialism, and then you do another experiment, and that would be changed, and then they would change the argument again, and it got to the point of like shifting goalposts ad infinitum until there was nowhere else. Firstly, that's not how you do science, but the point is they shifted it so often that by the end of it, there wasn't even any place to shift them to. So, like there wasn't. They just shifted at the point where they were out of places to go. So, yeah, we have to shift our ontological assumptions based on the physics, I think.
Are these guys that that appeared in these videos? Are they consciously aware that they may be changing the very paradigms of science?
Yeah, I don't know how deeply they get into the philosophy of it. Like a lot of them, I don't think understand like the implications regarding philosophy of mind and theism and so forth. But they do understand it says.
Well, such guy is an atheist.
Yeah, I know that was the interesting thing. He's an atheist, but like he's like saying, universe is all an illusion. I'm like. All he has to do from that point is say, well, is your mind an illusion? And if he says yes, then he's just rejected his rationality. If he says no, then that means that either he's behind the physical universe in a solipsistic fashion, in which case he's admitted he's a solipsist, which makes no sense, or third option, he's admitted that is a larger mind behind it, which means theism. So I think that he probably just hasn't thought through the philosophic implications of it. Like a lot of them don't. I mean, they're mostly concerned with modeling reality and
Some people don't want to completely.
Yeah, they don't. They just completely ignore the implications of it, and they're like, yeah, they don't want to because they're scared of where it goes. But that's where I guess people like me come in.
Brian Greene was quoted there. I
Yep.
think maybe it was you who quoted him. Were you inferring that he has some religious?
Oh no. I think I'm not certain where he is on religion, but what I was getting at is that when I use some of the physics, like they don't. These physicists, a lot of them don't draw the philosophic implications from their physics, right? But
they deliberately avoid doing
they
so.
literally avoid doing so. But then I bring it up on YouTube or on Facebook, and I show these videos and like argue. Well, based on the physics they're presenting, and you add these just simple things like Descartes' cogito, and you can see obviously what's going on here. And the atheists then react not because these people are religious themselves, but in the sense that they are religious enablers, as it were, allowing me to make these. And they're kind of annoyed by the fact that this physics is showing up because it allows people to draw obvious conclusions that they don't want to reach. So.
Yet I have heard fairly recently or read that a survey of cosmologists and physicists has revealed a remarkably high proportion of them are open to a non-material presence in the universe or in the cosmos.
Yeah.
I don't know what the number is. It was somewhere in the 80s, as I recall.
Yeah. Either religious or like some kind of, maybe some people believe in kind of a force or higher power or something that was like a 20 to 30% or something like that.
Yeah, maybe a soft pantheism.
Yeah. And then a good bunch more were religious. And
Well, the interesting thing is the Stoics are theists.
yeah.
God created the universe.
And there's, yeah. Yeah, the connection between science and atheism has been very much overblown by a few loudmouths. So their names being Lawrence Krauss. I shouldn't say that, but it's true. But yeah.
Thank you very much for carrying out, and hopefully sometime in the future I will come back.
Okay. Thanks.
When we've got it all sorted out.
Yeah.